Hello, beloved ones. It's David Ault. This past week, I was in my backyard putzing, as they say. That means I was out there getting my hands dirty and gardening and weeding. And the thought passed through my mind that many of the things that I had my hands on that I was caring for are going to die, impermanence, and that I really don't have any control over that. I can do my best, but things are still going to die. But that doesn't prevent me from continuing to regularly, as time permits, go out and care for the things that are around me. There's great satisfaction in that. And then that made me recall a book that I read decades ago. It was by a man named Malcolm Gladwell, and perhaps you read it too. It was called The Tipping Point. And early in the book, he was describing this local initiative that I believe one of the boroughs around Manhattan implemented. The local government got together, and the initiative was to start to repair broken windows in abandoned buildings. Now, think about that. Why repair broken windows in abandoned buildings? Buildings that probably would never even see restoration, that will probably be torn down in the future anyway. But psychologically, they began to, in this kind of elevated think tank, realize that when someone continues to see a broken window, then what happens within them psychologically is it just continues to feed on despair and futility. Futility being that all pervasive thing that just goes, what's the point? And we become stagnant and we become more and more deeply lost in the fog of the purpose of why we exist and why we are here. And so something as simple as repairing a broken window in an abandoned building changes the biology of a person that lives in that area. So suddenly they're walking down the sidewalk and they go, oh, and a little spark of hope goes off inside of them. It elicits a train of thought about possibility and things that just go in all different kinds of directions. And that little shift in thinking changes them. It even changes their behavior. And lo and behold, if that wasn't true when the data from that initiative came in, it had a dramatic impact upon crime. Crime decreased. There was much more involvement, kind of skin in the game, community wise, when they began to see that, because suddenly people were invited to take pride, to have skin in the game, if you will, with regards to where they live in their community, just from repairing broken windows. And I thought, it's kind of the same with me and just my little backyard, that I'm out there doing those things. And even though I know some of those things are not going to last, it brings me great joy when I see it. It brings me great joy to just observe the psychology of the visual and the way I feel inside, and the way in which we get to include and bring other people over and share that our home has become sort of an open forum for community gatherings and lessons and things that help elevate the spirit. And I'm thinking, there is something there for you and I as well. As this current state of affairs continues to look wildly unimaginable with regards to all things terrible, it's important for you and I to think about being broken window repairers. What is ours to do? To not put measurement of big or small onto anything, but to realize that in your own form and fashion, you have everything capable within you to repair the broken windows of perception, to help other people remember beauty and possibility, through your example and by the way in which you serve others. And what happens then if we started to do that more and more and more? I believe that we become less magnetized to these little pocket groups of despair who only continue to echo worst case scenario. You become more magnetized to those people who understand impermanence, but who operate by what I call a sort of gospel of anyway. It's kind of my little methodology for getting through the world. I call it the gospel of anyway. Having traveled the world and been involved in global education and in places like slums and villages where marginalization seems amplified, where little things that you do one year deteriorate by the next year and you have to keep redoing them over and over again, it's easy to kind of throw your hands up in the air and go, this is too hard. But for some crazy reason, we keep going back. And in that, you start to see a particular sort of seed or a new form of a heritage being planted in the psychology of the people who live in these slums and these villages. Over time, new ideas and new possibilities, I call it sort of an up leveling in group consciousness, begins to take place. And what was once deemed impossible now becomes possible. I love the way in which we can describe it sometimes as what was once our ceiling becomes our floor. And you have the capability, wherever you are, in whatever community, with whatever resource that you have. And resource is not just monetary, it's also mental. In fact, it's mainly mental. If you find a way to become a broken window repairer, like what are some of the ways? Some of the most immediate things are we live in an age of social media, the immediacy. And what has happened for many is that they have used social media sort of as a garbage dump. Perhaps they don't have anybody else to talk to. They have used it as a sort of just repository for all things. Bleh. And then we all can justify whatever we want to justify. And well, it's my page or it's my social media account. I can do what I want. But if you began to look at that and you started to look at your responsibility or your role as a broken window repairer, then perhaps we become more selective. We become more responsible in the things that we share. We don't just share blindly without researching. I mean, this is just one little component of what we can all do in that moment. We stop maybe using it as just the community pool by which we whine. And we take it upon ourselves to go, how can I inspire today? How can I provide something that just might repair the broken window for someone else? I don't believe that that infringes upon your right, but I do think it's a higher calling or an invitation for what you and I might be staring at with regards to where the world is right now. I was also thinking too about the Native American traditions and that there is this thing where the council would come together and it was something to do with decision making, and that when they were gathered in council to make big decisions, the first priority in that was how will this decision affect 7 generations from now? Meaning that those who were sitting right there won't even be around when the ripple effect of this decision will really be in full force. And so there is a consideration for how will this continue to affect future generations. And I think the same holds true for us when we think about impermanence, when we think about possibility, when we look at all things and we can easily be sucked into the despair and what's going to happen to us. Sometimes the best thing, in fact, I believe the most critical thing that we can do is to hone our own interior world. In order to experience peace, we have to become peaceful. It's the same thing, when we think of things, all things lawful, that in order to uplift or to feel uplifted, we must become someone who uplifts. And when I think about the data of you and I becoming broken window repairers, a couple of things come to mind. I think one thing I wrote down was it's a realignment. Just like you take an automobile into a repair shop to get realigned because the wheels get off balance. To do something like that, to like make the motivation of your day be how can I repair the broken window of perception? How can I uplift and buoy the inner environment of those around me, both literally and metaphorically? Then we are helping be sort of a repair shop where people are finding hope in their realignment. And what that realignment does is it reminds us that there is such a thing as oneness. There is such a thing as unity. And that oneness and unity are really tangibly felt in community and the things that are immediately around you. The other thing, too, is that I thought about oftentimes we don't do things without a motive. And most of the time, the motive is how is this going to benefit me? And I want you to look at the paradox of motive, for example. I want you to see it paradoxically, meaning that I want you to set motive aside and just go, how may I serve? And in that service, paradoxically, that that thing which is motive kind of is like circuitry. It comes back and it really does benefit us as well. It restores vision. A visionary is someone who understands that once they remember, they are realigned with unity and oneness and the purpose for being in existence. Once they remember those things, then they set off on their visionary course, recognizing that it will never be completed in their lifetime. Going back to the gospel of anyway, and we do it anyway. And a true visionary then sets upon reevaluating decisions, becoming more conscious about how and who they spend their time with and what they spend their time doing. And everything becomes more and more and more aware. And when we do all of those things, it's encased in this sense of lawfulness. And it is truly circuitry. It comes back to us. What we put out comes back to us, but we're not doing it for what we get. That's the paradox. But that's already baked in. And I believe that every single one of us, if you're on my mailing list, you have the capacity, you know these things. This isn't new for you. But it's so easy nowadays to get so lost, to forget. So get your hands dirty. Get your hands dirty in things that you know are impermanent, but are going to readjust the psychological framework, the biology inside of you and other people. You can do that. You can do that. You can do that. Much love.